It's really exciting to be here at A-Life, and particularly in this workshop. In this talk, yeah, it's really related to Alan's, in that I'm thinking about, we've been working in ecoacoustics, but in this paper, in this talk, I want to make a case for the value of integrating this quite nascent discipline of ecoacoustics with ideas from A-Life, in particular with complex adaptive systems frameworks for addressing contemporary socio-ecological issues. So you can pick any crises, really. The crisis I'm going to pick is interactions at human-environment interfaces. So understanding, monitoring, managing, perhaps modifying our interactions is a critical challenge that we need to address. So in this paper, I point to the value of integrating ecoacoustics and complex adaptive systems for addressing some of these challenges. So as it's quite a short talk, a kind of spoiler alert, if you like, this is the main thrust of the paper, that complex adaptive systems have been highlighted, the potential for understanding, monitoring and managing ecosystems through these perspectives has great potential, but have fallen short of the promise in delivering both in our ability to accurately predict tipping points or in good enough time, and we're going to come back to that at the end of the talk, and also for scaffolding and providing decent approaches to governing the commons. So the commons here being common resources which are supported by or directly created by emergent properties of ecosystems. Ecoacoustics then, some of you may be familiar with, I'll give a quick introduction, is the scientific study of the ecological role of sound in the environment. I'll come back to this in a second. This holds great promise as a practical tool, as Alan has mentioned, in ecosystem monitoring. But we're lacking theoretical frameworks and we need better computational methods. So the main thrust of this paper is that integrating ideas from these two disciplines addresses a lacuna in each discipline, and together then fosters better approaches to tackling some of the contemporary issues, particularly in monitoring, managing ecosystem resources from this holistic viewpoint that Alan's talking about of equitable and just governance. So just quickly then, ecoacoustics, for anyone that's not familiar, is the study of the ecological role of sound. So the soundscape is another name for the acoustic environment. This is all the sounds emanating from the landscape, sounds of biotic organisms, of geophysical processes, of anthropological processes. So it's literally the site of interaction of human and natural processes. And that's the first reason I think it's a great space to study the human environment interface. It takes a kind of the theoretical basis of this is perhaps in evolutionary terms. So sound is seen as a resource, much like food or habitat. It's therefore partitioned as we can see that as an acoustic extension of niche theory. And so the theory is that if the acoustic environment is partitioned, it's patterned, and so learning to listen to the environment then provides some kind of proxy or insight into the status of the environment. Yeah. So this is emerging, as I said, as a cost-effective tool, but there's lots to do, and we'll return to that at the end. Another really important facet here is that we need to govern the governing of the commons requires buy-in and participation and equitable sharing, right, of all humans and other organisms with which we share the environment. So importantly, as well as being computationally measurable, the global soundscape, it's also, of course, sound is actually fundamentally a subjective phenomena, right? It's the experience of vibration, it's the perception experience of vibration. And this is something common to the vast majority of organisms on Earth. They're sensitive to, if not producers of vibrations, including all humans. So soundscape then is amenable to study from a range of perspectives. What I propose here is it therefore coheres a kind of epistemological nexus that fosters more equitable and harmonious governance. So I'm going to illustrate some of these ideas with a series of case studies. This is all work in ecoacoustics that I've done in collaboration with colleagues across disciplines, and most of the projects are ongoing. So the first is an example of the potential of soundscape methods in monitoring ecosystems. This fits very much in the environmental monitoring scheme that Alice has been talking about. You know, this idea that we can use technology, obviously recycled and carefully thought through, because we're working with local communities at every step. But back in 2012, when we did this work, this had yet to be proven. So quickly, a first insight into how we go about thinking through and validating the possibilities of listening to ecosystems. This research is a mix of very muddy field work. This is Nenke. He was chief of Nenkapare, a Warani group in the eastern Amazon, eastern Ecuador and western Amazon. So working with communities in Ecuador and in the UK, we carried out some validation studies in tropical and temperate regions. So this practically, in practical terms, this is putting up 15 of these recorders on trees. They're only placed there for 2 weeks at a time, so monitoring about a kilometre square, 2 ecozones, temperate and tropical, and we're recording across a gradient of habitat types, so primary forest, regenerating or secondary forest, and monoculture, agricultural land in each place. The next step then, once you've got all this audio, is to carry out some kind of simple feature analysis. As I mentioned, this discipline follows a kind of evolutionary idea. So the more species there are, the more pressure there is between niches, the wider dispersion of the niches, and so you'll get this dispersion of sound in spectro-temporal space. That's the main motivational theory, the acoustic niche hypothesis. So the kind of simple features we're looking at is things like take an audio file, FFT, make a spectrogram, look at the distribution of energy, bin the spectrogram, do like a Shannon index or something to look at that, right? So we can look at patterns through the day. So this is 28,000 1-minute files taken from 15 recorders round the clock over 2 weeks. And we can see here relative to dawn, so the dotted lines are dawn, and we can see the dawn chorus. This is in the UK. We can see quiet nights and noisier daytimes. Now, my particular interest in this study was precisely for the reasons Alan mentioned at the beginning of his talk, looking at simple acoustic indices. So rather than doing deep learning, can we have at the bottom, we've got things like zero crossing rate, spectral centroid, RMS. So computationally simple means energy efficient as well, right? So these sorts of things could run for a long time. So this is really just an idiot check to see that we've got some sensible patterns coming out. And in the UK, we can see the quiet nights, the daytime. In Ecuador, so on the left, this is primary forest. In the centre, it's secondary. In the third column, it's a palm oil plantation. We see the reverse pattern. So, for example, look at RMS in the central column. We can see relatively quiet days and then a loud insect and invertebrate chorus at night. So even these really, really simple indices give us about a 65% correlation with the species, the avian species, right? So these same 1-minute files were listened to by local ornithologists and we compared the species data with the acoustic indices. And that's pretty impressive. If we do a multivariate analysis, so combine all of the indices together and look at the ability of them to predict the habitat, we actually see that the acoustic indices are better predictors than the species, the avian species themselves, which is normally what we'd use to monitor, to measure the kind of status of an ecosystem. So on the right there, you've got confusion matrices for the acoustic indices versus on the left for the species. And we can see, for example, in Ecuador, you're getting down to just under 2% error. The trick here, though, we're not really sure what sounds it was that was causing these really strong clustering, these strong classifications. So the message here is that acoustic approaches are really promising, but we need other results. We need other approaches as well. So the next study is a contemporary project looking at community-led reef restoration in West Papua. And the concern really here is not only to produce affordable, sustainable technologies, but to produce technologies and methods that the local fishers can use, right? So this here, the main source of food and income is fishing, but the reefs have been devastated both by illegal aquarium fishing, which they use cyanide, and dynamite fishing, as well as climate change. So there's plenty of reef restoration programs, but there's insufficient capacity to carry out the government ratified protocols. So what we were interested in here was, can we use affordable technology that, yes, still needs to be, there's a long way to go in making this recyclable and sustainable in the ways that Alan talked about, but these developing protocols that are rapid, that can be carried out by the local fishers. So here we were looking at 3D photogrammetry, so making 3D models from 2 GoPros. You can do this even snorkeling strapped to a bamboo pole, and then also recording, sound recordings. So the logic here, of course, fish make grunts, the snapping sound, the crackling sound of snapping shrimp. The hypothesis is that there's greater, these communities are greater over reef. And sure enough, what we see is some positive relationships between, here is the acoustic evenness index. So this is one of these diversity indices, which is basically a Shannon entropy type measure over the spectrogram. We see a positive relationship with fish abundance as well as with live coral. So the kind of scientific results are positive. We found an affordable monitoring tool that the fishers can use, and importantly, this, right, by employing them in the conservation program, this prevents them needing to go and collect fish using cyanide for the aquarium trade. So there's moving towards the sustainable livelihoods as well as conservation models. But the real result for me here, in terms of governance, was not the scientific result, but a more kind of social result, if you like. One evening when it was too wet to dive, I was talking to one of the marine biologists on the project, who was himself from local islands, from a fishing community. When we were in the Warani communities in Ecuador, everyone was very interested in the recorders. Everyone was very keen to help us because they recognized that we were concerned with the forest as they were. But it didn't really fit in with their ways of doing things. And I felt there was a slight jar for me with that. So when we were working here, I thought, well, just speaking to these guys, I thought, what do you think? I said, do you think it's sensible to try and listen to the reefs? Does that make sense to you? And this guy, Eldridge, just looked at me and said, yeah, of course. I mean, when we go night fishing, we don't know where the reefs are because it's dark. We put the oar to our ear and we just listen for the sound of rain, right? So they knew that the fish lived on the reef, and so did the snapping shrimp, and so they could use the sound of the snapping shrimp to guide them to the rain. And that feels promising because we've got not only an affordable data-driven methodology, but we've also got a method that aligns with their everyday knowledge and practices. And this supports the kind of buy-in and tiered governance that Deeps et al. Highlight as critical in governing the commons of complex adaptive systems. Okay, so the third example is again ongoing work, and this time mostly in Arctic regions. I'm working with a human geographer, Jonathan Clovis-Jones, author mountaineer, and cultural anthropologist Roger Norham. This project is concerned with how we make maps, wilderness mapping in particular, and it's been through various iterations. This was in northern Sweden, in Abisko. Thanks, Alex. So I've just seen 2 minutes. I thought I was on 15 out of 20, so I'll move on quickly. So the concern here is creating maps, the problem, if you like, is conservation of wilderness, which is critical to future planetary well-being. But like all resources, there's this, the resolving conflicts is hard. And what we need to do to resolve conflicts is to make sure that stakeholders, that all stakeholders, or human stakeholders as well as non-humans, are invested in those the decision-making process, and also that their perspectives are held to account, are represented in the maps that we use. So typically we make wilderness maps just using GIS data. So we collect visual data from satellites, and it's a multivariate process looking at things like distance from road, distance of vegetation to some historical point in the past. But this obviously doesn't take into account all the lives of the creatures and the humans that play out in that landscape. So this project is asking, how can we integrate those perspectives, these bottom-up perspectives, with the top-down perspectives? And our approach is to make, is to use transects. So we design transects along a gradient of human influence here from Arbisco, from the road in the northeast of this map, going up into the Lap wilderness. And then walking along these transects, we carry out participatory walking methods, we carry out habitat surveys and ecoacoustic surveys. These are temporary ecoacoustic surveys that then bridge the subjective, personal, qualitative perspectives with the objective, quantifiable and scalable data. So the approach here then is, the idea is that Soundscape kind of coheres data across disciplines. It provides a way to integrate and triangulate data and modes of research, and addresses the challenge of mapping at human environment interfaces to integrate stakeholder values and concerns into the process. Okay, very quickly then, I'll just mention the last project, which flips it around. It's entirely indigenous-led project working with the ancestral Quechua population of Transects in eastern Ecuador. They're attempting to gain heritage status for their land, but as a shamanic community, they need support in articulating the ecocultural value of the forest in a way that is recognizable by the kind of bureaucratic processes of Ecuador. For the Quechua, the soundscape is not only the interface between each other and between the forest, but also with the supai, with the spirits of the forest. So here the challenge is to articulate these myths and legends, if you like, in a way with their cosmovision, in a way that aligns and is commensurate with the bureaucracy. So here we're helping to kind of decolonize conservation in a way, to support buy-in as well as nested governance. Now I think I'm running out of time, so I'll leave these. I'll leave you to read the paper. The main idea then is that these are all promising. Ecoacoustics is promising, but is a bit of a blunt tool. On the other side, one of our main concerns is for other complex adaptive systems holds great promise in tracking tipping points, but really they're not early enough. So the suggestion here is that trait-based early warning signals are better than critical slowing down systems, but they're still not early enough, and the data is really messy and insufficient. And that actually we could, just as phenotypic changes precede population changes, the kind of acoustics, by listening, we can detect behavioural changes which will hopefully precede trait-based changes and be kind of just in time. So the idea here is to integrate complex adaptive systems perspectives with ecoacoustics perspectives to create some dynamical approaches to monitoring in a way that integrates concern for the local communities for as well. So creating successful monitoring tools in a way that's embedded and engaged with the local communities. So I'm sorry for going over. I thought we were on 20 minutes. Thank you very much for listening.